Hello everyone. My name is Alex Martinez. I am a developer advocate at MuleSoft. And in today's video, we are going to learn how to create an async API from Anypoint Code Builder to connect to Salesforce platform events. Now, before we start, let's talk a little bit about the use case. So you have your Salesforce organization up and running. You have a custom object with a few fields to identify the users. For example, here we can see we have the MuleSoft username, the date of birth, the email, and the role. Now, what you want is to connect to an external system every time there is a new user and update that external database with this information. The problem is that this external system is available only 60% of the time, so it might take a while before the user finishes processing, and we can just leave a thread open for several minutes or hours until it finishes processing. Salesforce will, of course, time out before that. The other problem is that the person using the Salesforce organization might want to see the progress on this user being processed. But with no visible access to MuleSoft, they won't be able to know if it's already been processed or not. Because of this, we will be adding a new notes field into this object, and we can update this field from MuleSoft after the object has been processed. So now that we added the notes field, this is how we'll look at this. Every time that we create a new user, we will see the default value user hasn't been processed. This way, the user is created immediately and the process to send this information to the external system is added to a queue. As soon as the user is processed, we will update this field in Salesforce, so whoever is taking a look at this user will be able to see that the user has been processed or has not been processed yet. All right, so to get started, let's head to the setup. We will be creating two platform events, one to process the initial information and the second one to update the object after it has been processed in the external system. Also, something to note, we could technically update the Salesforce object directly from MuleSoft instead of having to go through a second platform event. However, just for the sake of demonstration, we will be using both events to demonstrate the subscription and the publishing. In the quick find, let's search for platform events and click on this. Once we are here, we can create a new platform event. The first one, we are going to call it process Mule user. We will leave this publish immediately and click on save. Once we are here, let's add some custom fields to match the object. So for example, we had a date for the date of birth. We had an email. So let's select text and add here email. I'm gonna make this required because we do need the email every time. Then we have the MuleSoft username. Next, we have the role. We're gonna make this a text. And finally, we have the notes that we're gonna make as a text. So finally, we have all of these custom fields that we have from the original MuleSoft user object. Now that is all for this platform event. Let's create now the second platform event, and we are going to call this update Mule user. This is what we will be using to update the notes field. Now in this case, since we will only need the email and the notes fields, the email to match the unique identifier and the notes field to update the actual field, let's just create those two. All right, so those are all the fields for these platform events. If we go back to the whole list, we can see that we have the process Mule user and the update Mule user. First, we're going to publish from the object that is created to the process Mule user platform event. And then once we process everything from MuleSoft, we will publish it to the update Mule user, who will talk to the MuleSoft user's object and update the notes field. Now, to actually process this whole thing or trigger this whole thing, we're going to go to Process Automation Flows, and we will be creating flows for these two. So let's create a new flow. We're going to start from scratch, and the first one is going to be a record triggered flow because we want this to be triggered every time that we create a new object. So in the objects, let's search for the MuleSoft user. We just want this every time that this is created. We don't have any entry conditions, and we are gonna let this be as actions and related records. After that, we can click on this plus button right here and search for create records because we are going to be creating a new platform event. So the label is going to be create platform event. This can be whatever you feel like you want to name this. This is going to be manually, and the object is going to be our first process Mule user platform event. So now we have to match all of the values from the fields. We have here triggering MuleSoft user, and we have to match the email. So if we scroll down, we will see email right here. The next field we're going to add is going to be the DOB or the date of birth. Same thing, go here and select DOB. The next one is going to be the MuleSoft username. We are just mapping every single field that this object has. Notes, if we scroll down, select this and select notes. And role, again, if we scroll down, select this and select role. All right, that is pretty much it. Remember to save. Here you can also use whichever name you want. Just remember which one it is in case you need to edit it. And remember to click on activate. Once it's activated, you can close this window and create a new flow for the second platform event. Once again, we are going to start from scratch, but now we're going to select platform event trigger flow. So every time that we get a new event or message published to this platform event, we are going to trigger this. This is going to be connected to the second one, which is the update Mule user. So that is all we need from here. Now let's click on the plus button and look for update records. Select that. Name this however you want. I'm going to name it update MuleSoft user. Select specify conditions to identify records. The object is going to be MuleSoft user. And if we scroll down, let's search for the email field equals, and the value that we want here is the one from the record from the update Mule user, platform event, and the email. This is how this should look like. And finally, the field that we are going to map is the notes. So if we once again go to the record, update MuleSoft user, and select the notes, then we are going to be able to map that to this, and it will be updated like that. So once again, remember to save, name this however you want, and click on save, and click on activate, very important. All right, so that is all the configuration from Salesforce. Remember that instead of using flows, you can also select to use Apex or Salesforce APIs, whichever one fits best for you. I thought flows was a little bit easier, so that's why I went with that. All right, so we can close the setup and we can keep this open when we create a new object. Now let's head to Anypoint Code Builder, select Design an API, name the specification however you see fit. Select AsyncAPI and make sure to select AsyncAPI 2.6 in YAML format. Create project. Once this opens, I have in the link in the description of the video some GitHub repo that you can use for this. So I'm just going to copy and paste that file. So here we have it. If we take a look at this, all of this is for governance. We can click here on the governance rule set and we can add a new one just to make sure that we are compliant and run this to make sure everything looks good. And we have the green mark, so we are compliant. So now if we take a look at all of this, we have some information. The default content type is going to be application JSON. We have some tags. Take a look at the servers. Here we have the Salesforce server with the protocol Salesforce pub sub. The protocol version is version 1 and the URL is api.pubsub.salesforce.com. After that, we have the channels, and these are our two platform events that we created. So every time that we want to connect to a platform event, you have to make sure to start this with /event/. Here you add the name of the platform event. In our case, is process Mule user and update Mule user. And because this is the API name, we are adding __e. So the first one we have is a process Mule user. Because we have to be subscribed to receive this platform event, we are using a publish. If this is your first time taking a look at an AsyncAPI specification, This is always the other way around. If you want to be subscribed, then you need to use the publish method. And if you want to be publishing, then you have to use the subscribe method. So we have those two channels, and then we have some components here to define the payload that we will be expecting. If you press this button right here, you will be able to open the API console, which will tell you the UI representation of this pretty much. So we have all of these things. We have the two API channels, the event process Mule user and the event update Mule user. So in the process Mule user, if we click on the publish, we will be able to see an example here of how this payload looks like. So if we go to the second one, which is the subscribe, we can also see what we are going to be sending. Please note that every time that you send a platform event, this has to be inside an array. And then inside the array, you can just use the object to send whatever you need to send to the platform event. In our case, we do need to send the created by ID and the created date fields, otherwise this will not work. After that, you can add any fields that you have. In our case, we set up the email and the notes fields, and remember they have to end in __C. If you take a look at the ones in the publish, all of the platform events that we receive from this will always have the event ID, the replay ID, event object, and inside the event object, we will always have the created date, the created by ID, and then we will have the actual fields that we create in the object, like MuleSoft username, DOB, email, notes, and role. All right, so once we have this configuration done, we have our API spec, we can go into MuleSoft and then publish API specification to Exchange. If you are not already signed up or logged in into your MuleSoft Anypoint platform account, please do so. Follow the prompts to log in and then select your business group. You can set any project name. I'm just going to keep all of the defaults, the asset version 1 and the API version 1. Once it arrives to this window, would you like to implement Salesforce PE integration? Select yes. Add any project name that you want. In my case, it's going to be Salesforce PE integration. Select your folder. The Mule runtime version, I'm going to select the latest, and same for the Java version. Once this finishes processing, go to source main resources and open the dev properties. You will be able to see here all of the properties from Salesforce that you can set up. In our case, we won't be using the consumer secret. We're going to change the reconnect count to 5 just to test. We are going to need a security token, a username, and a password, but we don't need the consumer key. So now make sure you update the username to the username you use to log in to Salesforce, and the password for that. If you are using a Trailhead Playground, make sure you get those credentials here. And you are also going to be needing a security token. If you don't know how to get this, please check the links in the description. So once you update your credentials, now go to source main Mule and open the flows.xml file. So we can take a look at what we have here. First, we have the message listener. So we have here the AsyncAPI config. These will come from the global configs.xml, but we're not going to look at that for now. The channel name is going to be event process Mule user, and the server is going to be Salesforce. This all comes from the API specification that we defined. I am going to select this logger and delete it. And next, I am going to set a variable to save all the contents that we receive from the platform event. So let's call this Mule user, and the value is going to be the payload. After that, we can go ahead and create a an until successful. And if we take a look at it, let's just leave the default values of 5 max retries and 60,000 milliseconds. This just means that every time that the until successful receives an error, it's going to retry to send the same information that we have inside this block. So now we could just call the external system here directly, but we want to create a try scope. So select the try scope right there, and if you click on it, you will be able to see what is the scope of this. So we have just a regular thing and the error handler part. So here in this left side is where we will be creating the call to the external system. For now, I'm just gonna leave it as a logger so we can see the representation of what is where we would be calling the external system from. Then in the error handler, this is very important. First, we have to create an onErrorPropagate. And when we set up this onErrorPropagate, we want to select the type of connectivity. Now, if you are doing an HTTP request here in the logger, then you would select here the HTTP connectivity type and so on, depending on the type that you are expecting. So this means that when you do the call to the external system, if you receive a connectivity error, then the error is going to be propagated into the until successful, so it will be retried one more time, and so on until it reaches the exhausted or until it is able to send the successful request. So here I'm just adding a logger to represent the error that is going to be resent. And then if we receive any other type of error, for example, let's say that you do connect to the external system, but you receive a bad request error. That means that you were able to go through to the external system, but you received an error back from the external system. This is not a connectivity issue. This means that you do not want to retry to send the same information over again, because then it's never going to stop. So for that case, we're going to select onErrorContinue. And when we are setting this up, we can select any type here. And once again, I'm just going to add a logger here to represent the error that we are going to continue. So in this case, because we select onErrorContinue, here you would in theory create a new payload to be created so you can save the error that was received from the external system. It will get out of the try, it will get out of the until successful, and it will continue the flow because it is technically not an error. So after you continue the flow, you will be able to handle this error however you see fit. So once we were able to connect to the external system, whether you receive a successful response or an error response, you were able to connect to it, so this is no longer going to be retried over and over again. In this case, we continue to the last, and in our case, we are going to be creating a transform message. Inside this transform message, let's configure the set payload, and this is the script that we are going to be using. So we have to send the created by ID, which will come from the variables that we set up for the Mule user.event.createById. The created date, we're going to set it up as now as number, so we can make it an epoch number. The email is going to come again from the Mule user variable in event email C. And the notes, we are going to hardcode it into user has been processed. So if you received an error like a bad request, this is where you would set up the error that you want to put here. Like there was a bad request coming from the external system, please correct your user, and so on. And finally, if we go here to connectors, API kit for AsyncAPI, we will select the publish because we want to send the whole payload that we just set up in the transform message into our publish operation. So we have to select the AsyncAPI configuration, same as we had before. The content is going to be payload. Note that you can also set up the transform that you had before here instead of putting it in a transform message, whichever makes more sense for you. And then if we scroll down, we will be able to see the channel name. So select the update Mule user and the server name, which is going to be Salesforce. Now, the other thing is, what would happen if the retries from the until successful are exhausted? Because we have here 5 max retries. What if those are exhausted and it needs to try again? Then, for that, we would go to this error handler, create an onErrorPropagate, and here we would be creating any of the future processing. This could be, for example, returning it to the other queue, to the first queue, to the process Mule user platform event. We can republish that there so it can be reprocessed once it is available. We can also send it to an external queue or to an external system that will make sure that this is reprocessed in time. Depending on your use case is what you would be doing in this onErrorPropagate here. Now with all of this set up, let's go ahead and run this application locally. All right, once we see that this was deployed and there were no errors, we can go ahead and run this. So to trigger it, we have to create a new user. This is going to be Alex Martinez. Let's select a date of birth. I was born yesterday. And my email, alex@salesforce.com. Role, let's select employee. And the notes is user hasn't been processed. So let's save this. And if we go here, we can see that something was clearly processed here. So that means that we can see this. Right now it says user hasn't been processed, but let's refresh this page so we can see if the notes were updated. And they were. Now we can see that the user has been processed message because that is what we created. So congratulations, you were able to successfully create an API, an async API specification in a Mule project to connect to Salesforce platform events, both as a subscriber and as a publisher. This is just one example of how you can best make use of Salesforce and MuleSoft EDA resources. You would think that this type of slow or unreliable systems are not that common, but they are more common than you think, actually. So it's always good to know how to handle these scenarios with different toolkits. In this case, we used MuleSoft and Salesforce platform events. So that is all for this video. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!